The wind howled across the high desert like it wanted to strip the skin from her bones. Lena Begay's fingers had gone numb hours ago, but she kept them locked around the baby, pressing little Sani against her chest beneath the threadbare wool shawl. The boy burned with fever, his tiny breaths sharp and shallow against her throat. He hadn't opened his eyes since before sunrise, and now the sun was almost gone again, dipping low over the red cliffs behind them. The wagon lurched through a frozen rut, and Lena staggered forward, catching herself against the cracked bench with one arm. Ma Kai said behind her, his voice tight, "He's not doing good." "I know." The rest of the children were silent, packed tight in the wagon like firewood shivering under what few blankets they had left. 9 children, 12 cents, and no food. They hadn't eaten since a half bag of cornmeal yesterday morning, and the last of the water had frozen solid in its gourd. This was it. Bitter Mesa. She stared ahead at the cluster of buildings nestled between 2 rising rock faces. Smoke curled from a chimney. A sagging wooden sign read, "Post and Trading Co." Horses stood tied out front. Lanterns burned through dusty windows. Life. Warmth. If the letter hadn't lied. Her boots crunched down in the snow as she climbed from the wagon, nearly dropping Sani. Her knees buckled under the boy's weight. He felt like nothing now, just bones and heat and the sound of struggling breath. Kai jumped down beside her and reached for the reins, his dark eyes scanning the town. This the place, it better be. She stepped forward into the biting wind. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the land itself wanted to hold her back. She felt the eyes on her before she saw them, figures behind curtains, silhouettes frozen on boardwalks. No one moved to greet them. No one smiled. The front door of the trading post creaked open. A woman emerged wrapped in a woven coat with raven patterns down the sleeves. Her silver hair whipped in the wind as she studied Lena. Her eyes went wide, then wet. You're the one I am." Lena shifted Sani in her arms. "Mrs. Begay," I answered the letter. The woman's lips parted like she wanted to say more, but her voice cracked. She pressed a hand over her mouth. "Where is he?" Lena asked. "Is he here?" "He's coming," the woman whispered. "But you should know." The wind dragged the rest away, but then a man's voice cut through it like a blade. "That's enough, Aunt Selina." Lena turned. He stood tall and still near the edge of the barn where the shadows met the snow. His coat hung open despite the cold, revealing a red shirt stained at the cuff. His skin was weathered bronze cheekbones, sharp mouth set like he hadn't smiled in years. But it was his eyes that held her the color of stormy sky and just as full of warning. "You're late," he said. "I walked," she replied, her voice dry. "Had to sell the mule in Kayenta to buy food." Then the snow came. He looked down at the wagon, saw the faces Kai Rosie twins, Nara and Leah Patrick, Colleen Jonah, and the baby in her arms. The silence stretched. "You brought them all. You think I'd leave one behind?" A flicker of something passed through his face. Regret. Or maybe memory. "No, I don't suppose you would." "Are you Thomas Yazzie?" "I am." "Then let's not waste time. My sun's burning up. I've got 9 mouths and $1 to my name. You said warmth. You said food. Was that true or wasn't it?" He held her eyes for a beat. Then he nodded. "Come on. The house is just down the ridge. There's heat, food, blankets." Aunt Selina stepped forward. "She needs to know Thomas." "She will," he said without looking at her. "Later." Lena didn't wait. She turned to Kai. "Drive the wagon. Don't let the wheels freeze in this slush. Yes, Ma." The boy climbed up, snapping the reins with a cracked whisper. The horses trudged forward. They reached the house just as the sky turned to indigo and the first stars crept out from behind the mesa. Lena couldn't breathe. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress. Timber and stone 2 stories high, light glowing in the windows. A porch wrapped around it, and beyond that structures spread like a village bunkhouses, barns, sheds, corrals. She turned to Thomas. "You said a small place?" He didn't answer. "You lied." "I said what would get you here," he replied. "Would you have come if you knew no? But I came anyway. So maybe it doesn't matter." Inside the house smelled of cedar and something spiced. The kitchen was warm. A fire roared in the hearth. A woman stood at the stove, her long braids swinging as she stirred a pot. She turned. Her eyes widened at the crowd of children. "Mother Earth," she whispered. "How many?" 9, Lena said. The woman moved fast, pulling bowls from shelves, gesturing to the long wooden table. "Sit. Eat first. Talk later." Lena lowered Sani into her daughter Rosie's arms and eased into a chair. Her limbs shook. Not from cold now, but from something deeper. Relief so sudden it hurt. The baby whimpered. The sound pierced her heart like a blade. Martha Thomas said from the doorway, "This is Lena Begay. The others are her children. They look like bones and skin," Martha replied, ladling stew. "But they'll fill out." "Thank you," Lena whispered. A bowl landed in front of her. Steam rose into her face. "You first," Martha said. Lena's hands trembled around the spoon. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The first bite burned her throat but settled deep. She could have wept. Across the room, Thomas stood silent, watching. When the children were fed and the kitchen had quieted, he nodded toward the hallway. "There's something you need to know," he said. She followed him down the dark corridor past photographs nailed crooked on the wall. Some had faces scratched out. Others had eyes that looked too alive. He opened a door to a small room lit by a single oil lamp. A desk. Papers. A map of the ranch carved into the wood. He closed the door behind her. "My wife didn't die of sickness," he said. "Or childbirth. That's the lie they tell." Lena's spine straightened. What did she die of then? He looked up at her. She died of knowing too much. Lena's breath caught. "And if we're not careful," he said, "so will you." "If a woman's silence can bury the truth, then mine's been a graveyard for years," Lena said, her voice low. "But I'm done burying." The lamplight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the ranch map on the desk. Lena stared at the inked lines, trying to make sense of them, while Thomas's words still rang in her ears. She died of knowing too much. The air between them grew heavy, thick with something unspoken. Thomas leaned his weight against the far wall, arms crossed over his chest, jaw locked tight, like a man guarding secrets behind his teeth. "What did she know?" Lena asked. Thomas glanced toward the door as if listening for footsteps. Enough to make the wrong people nervous. Enough to get her watched. Then blamed. Then gone. Lena's spine prickled. She'd come for safety, not riddles. "I have 9 children," she said, her tone steel-edged now. "One sick, one limping. None of them have ever slept in a real bed. If danger's following, you say it now. I'll take my family and leave before the moon sets." Thomas met her eyes. "You're already in it, Lena. You stepped onto this land, and now you're part of it. That letter I sent, you weren't the only one I wrote to." "Why me then?" "Because your name came up." His voice lowered. "From her journals. My wife kept them hidden under the floorboards. I found them 2 months after the funeral. You and she met once, didn't you?" Lena blinked, startled. She hadn't thought about that day in years. A supply line run near Fort Defiance. A soft-spoken woman with a braided bun and intelligent eyes had handed her a wrapped loaf of cornbread and whispered, keep your children close, and trust no one who smiles too fast. I didn't even know her name, Lena murmured. Her name was Ayanna, and she remembered you. Lena lowered herself into the straight-backed chair beside the desk. Why was she keeping journals? What was she hiding? Not hiding, he corrected. Recording. Land theft, false trades, broken treaties, things the council covered up, names of men who profited while families starved. She was trying to connect dots most folks wanted to stay scattered. Is that what you meant, dying from knowing too much? Thomas didn't answer. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutter. Lena heard a board creak upstairs, one of the children shifting in sleep. She thought of Sonny's heat against her collarbone, the wheeze of his breath. She couldn't afford shadows and secrets. I need to see those journals, she said. Thomas studied her. You're not like the others. No, she replied. I'm not soft. With a slow nod, he reached under the desk and pressed a concealed latch. A panel popped loose in the floor and he pulled out a wrapped bundle tied with red yarn. These are copies, he said. The originals are hidden where no one looks. Lena took them gently, her fingers brushing the worn leather cover. She opened to the first page where a delicate script read, "For the woman who will outlive my silence." She swallowed hard. Thomas leaned closer. You don't have to decide tonight. Just know it wasn't a mistake bringing you here. I don't believe in mistakes, Lena said. Only doors. And whether or not we walk through them. Thomas opened the door and stepped back, letting her pass. She held the journals tight, the weight of them unfamiliar but not unwelcome. The hallway stretched quiet and dim, the warmth of the hearth flickering against the far wall. As she reached the stairs, she found Kai waiting at the bottom. His arms folded the curve of his back, too proud for a 13-year-old. Everything okay, Ma? She nodded. Go back to sleep. We're safe for now. You sure about that? No. But it's warmer than the road. Kai held her gaze a second longer, then turned and padded back toward the bunks. Lena climbed the steps to the second floor and entered the room they'd been given, wide and plain, with cots along the wall and thick quilts that smelled of cedar and lavender. Rosie had fallen asleep with Sonny against her chest, her fingers tangled in his little shirt. The baby's breathing had steadied, though his face was still too pale. Lena sat on the edge of the cot and brushed a hand over his forehead. Still warm, but not burning. Her muscles loosened and her breath left in a slow exhale. She opened the journal again. They came for the land, but stayed for the silence. Because if a woman speaks too loud, she's accused of trouble. And if she writes it down, she disappears quietly. Page after page, Ayanna's words drew pictures darker than any Lena had imagined. She'd seen hardship, poverty, and broken promises. But this was architecture. A design threaded through contracts, bribes, quiet killings. A whisper of movement at the door made her look up. A young woman stood there, hair like black silk, eyes sharp beneath an arching brow. I'm Wren, the girl said. Martha's daughter. You don't sleep much, never have. Wren stepped in, crossing her arms. My mother says you're smart, that you read things most folks burn. Lena closed the journal slowly. I read what's worth remembering. Wren tilted her head. And if remembering gets you killed, then I die standing up. A flicker of respect passed through the girl's face. My mother said Ayanna used to say something like that. She did. You're not like her. I'm not trying to be. But you came when she called. Lena looked down at her hands. She knew the cost of silence. I've paid it too many times. Wren stepped closer. My uncle doesn't trust easily, but he didn't send that letter out of grief. He sent it out of fear. Good, Lena replied. Fear means he's still got something to lose. From the hallway, a voice rose, Martha's low but tense. Then Thomas's reply, sharper. Lena stood. Wren did too. They moved as one, stepping into the hall. At the bottom of the stairs, a man in a long black coat stood just inside the door. Snow clung to his boots. His face was narrow, pale, and clean-shaven. Government-issued hat slanted down to his brow. He didn't bother wiping his feet. I heard you had new arrivals, he said, eyes locking on Lena. And who's asking? Thomas's voice was ice. Deputy Carter. I handle land permits and trespassing reports. Got some concerns about who's been crossing into restricted grazing zones. We haven't crossed anything, Thomas said. The deputy shrugged. Funny thing about truth. It bends like barbed wire. Lena's jaw set. She stepped forward. If you're done stating nonsense, we've got children sleeping. His gaze shifted. And who might you be? She didn't blink. I'm the woman you'll wish you hadn't met if you keep sniffing where you shouldn't. A smile flickered at his lips. Well now. Looks like Bitter Mesa just got interesting. They don't fear the storm, Lena Martha whispered, watching the snow fall from the porch. They fear the ones who survive it and still speak. The wind swept through Bitter Mesa like it had teeth lashing against the wooden boards of the house. The snow came in sideways, erasing tracks as soon as they formed. But inside, the fire roared steady, casting a golden glow over the parlor, where Lena stood arms crossed, watching Martha pour tea with a hand too steady for what had just happened. The visit from Deputy Carter had rattled everyone, but not Martha. The woman was like braided willow, flexible but unbreakable. Her sharp cheekbones and iron-gray hair spoke of decades of holding the line. Lena leaned against the doorframe, still cold beneath her coat. You knew he'd come. I knew someone would, Martha said. They always do when Callahan starts digging again. What is he digging for? Answers, justice. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're poison in different bottles. Lena accepted the steaming mug, wrapping her fingers around it. He's not telling me everything. He never does, Martha replied. You have to be the kind of woman who learns to listen between the words. From the staircase came the sound of boots. Kai, already awake and dressed. He stepped into the room nodding at Martha, but his attention was fixed on Lena. I want to go with Thomas today. Lena raised an eyebrow. You think I'm letting you ride out in that storm? He said he's heading to the North Line. It's not far. I can help. He looked older in that moment, like the wind had scraped the boy from his bones and left something else behind. He asked you? Lena asked. Kai hesitated, then nodded. Said he needed someone who doesn't flinch. Martha's lips twitched. Well, he's not wrong there. Lena looked between them. She wanted to say no, wanted to lock every door and keep every child within arm's reach. But she remembered the journal beneath her cot and the names written in blood and ink. This land wasn't a sanctuary. It was a battlefield stitched with snow. Fine, she said, but you stay within shouting distance. Kai grinned. Always do. He was gone before she could change her mind. Later that morning, Thomas and Kai saddled the horses bundled in thick hides and disappeared into the white veil beyond the paddock. Lena stood by the barn, heart tight, watching them vanish. You let him ride out there because you know the truth's already knocking, Martha said quietly behind her. I let him ride because he needs to grow into the kind of man this land doesn't chew up, Lena replied. Martha looked at her, a kind of pride in her gaze. That's exactly why you're here. Inside, Sonny coughed in his sleep, and Rosie rubbed his back with a gentleness that quieted Lena's nerves. Wren was spreading cornmeal on a tin sheet for fry bread, humming low. The house moved with rhythm now, not comfort but order, until the dogs barked. Lena moved to the window. A figure approached from the south, tall, wrapped in a duster face half covered with a scarf. Not Carter. Not someone she recognized. Martha appeared beside her. "That's Ben Two Elk." "Friend or foe depends on the day," Martha murmured. "Today he's got a satchel. That means news." Lena met Ben on the porch. He removed his scarf, revealing a weathered face with dark eyes that didn't blink much. "Carter's asking questions down in Miner's Hollow," he said without preamble. "About your name. About Callahan's land deed. Even asked if any widows passed through recently." "He smells blood," Lena said. Ben nodded. "And someone's feeding it to him." Martha stepped beside her. "That's the part we don't like." Ben looked to Lena. "You stirred a hornet's nest coming here." "I didn't stir it," she replied. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." He almost smiled. "Then you better read faster." He handed her a folded page ripped from the back of one of Ayana's journals. Scrawled in the corner was a symbol Lena didn't recognize. A circle split by an X. Below it, a list of names. Martha stiffened beside her. "That's a death ledger." Lena turned to her. "What those names are men who disappeared. Some from rival ranches, some from federal offices. Ayana believed they were silenced quietly. No grave markers, no claims filed. Just gone." Lena's blood chilled. "How many are on this list?" 14, Ben said. "And the last one has a date next to it. Tomorrow." Lena's eyes dropped to the name Thomas Callahan. She swallowed hard. "What does the symbol mean?" she asked. "Some say it marks a bounty. Others think it's the council's way of signing off on things without writing names." Martha pointed to the paper. "And look below Thomas's name. There's a partial line. A second name being added." Ben squinted. "Could be your son." "No," Lena said the word sharp. "I won't let them touch him." "You don't have much time," Ben said. "Carter's not just a deputy. He's a broker. Information pressure payoffs. He doesn't arrest people, he delivers them." "Then we need to find out who's paying him," Lena said. Ben nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up." He turned to go, then paused. "There's a woman in Iron Horse Crossing. Works the telegraph switchboard. If Carter made any calls, she'll know." Lena nodded. "I'll go." Martha put a hand on her arm. "You'll need help." Wren stepped into the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her. "Then I'm going too." Lena met the girl's gaze. Something fierce lived in her new unafraid. "We leave at first light," Lena said. "No mistakes." Inside, the fire hissed as a log shifted. Behind them, the white sky hung heavy, silent. But Lena felt it, something brewing louder than wind. Not a storm of snow, but of reckoning. In this territory, secrets don't stay buried. They rise with the thaw, reeking of blood and unfinished business. The hooves clattered hard against the icy trail leading out of Bitter Mesa as dawn broke, casting a bruised light over the frost-bitten plains. Lena gripped the reins tightly, her fingers stiff in her gloves. Beside her, Wren rode with surprising calm, her braid tucked into her collar, her eyes scanning the terrain like she was born to this saddle. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp silence in its wake, a deceptive hush that hummed with danger beneath. Lena hadn't told Wren everything. She didn't need to. The girl was sharp enough to read between the lines. They were riding to Iron Horse Crossing, not just for information, but for a name, the name of whoever had marked Thomas for death. They reached the switchboard station by mid-morning, the squat building nestled against a jagged rise of rocks, like it knew better than to trust open ground. Lena dismounted and stepped inside first. The warmth hit her with the scent of coal and dry wool. A woman stood behind the desk, twisting a wire around her finger as if it were a nervous tick. She looked up with narrowed eyes. You Callahan's woman Lena didn't flinch. I am. The woman's gaze flicked to Wren. And this, my sister. Wren didn't correct her. The woman grunted. Name's Mabel. You're lucky I'm the one on shift. Others might not have been so welcoming. Lena stepped forward. We're not looking for welcome. We're looking for truth. Mabel snorted. Then you picked the wrong town. But I'll give you 5 minutes. After that, I gotta pretend you never came. She turned and led them behind the desk into a narrow hallway lined with wires and switch panels. At the far end sat a wall of clipped records, telegram slips, stacked in rows. I can't give you full transcripts, Mabel said, but I can tell you what I saw. Carter sent 3 wires this week, 2 to the county marshal's office and 1 to a private line in Helena. That last one's the one you should be worried about. Lena's pulse quickened. What was the message? Didn't say much. Just a symbol, then a date. I seen it before, circle with a cross through it. Lena swallowed. Did the reply come in? Mabel nodded slowly. Came back same day. Just one word, approved. Silence stretched between them. Wren stepped closer. The Helena number, who owns it? Mabel reached for a dog-eared ledger and flipped through it. Her finger paused. Belongs to a man named Clay Merrick. Big timber and rail money. Used to be on the Federal Land Commission. Lena felt the name settle in her bones. Merrick. She'd seen it before in one of Ayanna's journals. He was tied to the disappearances, the land seizures, and more than one suspicious fire. Mabel lowered her voice. If Merrick's involved, it ain't just about Thomas. It's about everything Callahan's sitting on. That ranch is worth more than gold to men like him. Rail lines are planned straight through it. Lena's jaw tightened. So Thomas is standing in their way. And so are you now, Mabel said. You need to decide fast what side of the line you want to die on. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering against the wooden walls like ghosts stirring. Lena turned to Wren. We need to get back, before the next move is made. But when they rode into Bitter Mesa that evening, the yard was empty. No dogs barked. No smoke rose from the chimney. Lena's heart dropped. She dismounted and ran for the house, Wren close behind. The door swung open under her hand. Inside, silence. Then movement. A creak on the floorboards upstairs. Lena drew the small revolver from her coat, stepping cautiously into the hallway. Lena came a voice, Kai. She exhaled hard. He appeared at the top of the stairs holding a candle. They took him. Lena's stomach dropped. Who Thomas? Deputy Carter and 2 men? Said they were taking him to Lockridge for questioning. But he didn't go quiet. Wren stepped forward. Where were the others? Ben tried to stop them, Kai said. He's hurt, he's out back. Martha's with him. The kids are fine. But Thomas, he told me to tell you not to follow unless you had something real in your hands. Lena lowered the gun. We do, but it might not be enough. Martha appeared in the doorway behind them, her hands stained with blood. They're moving fast now. They don't want truth. They want silence. Lena knelt beside the hearth, pulling out Ayanna's journal. She turned to the pages with the symbols, the names, the hidden maps. Wren knelt beside her, pointing to a set of coordinates. That's not Lockridge, she said. That's the quarry near Dustwater Ridge. Kai frowned. That place was shut down years ago. It's secluded, Martha said. No one would hear a gunshot. Lena stood, spine straight. Then we go tonight. Ben's voice rasped from the back door. You'll need more than fire and courage. He was pale but standing, leaning against the frame. I'll take you, he said. There's an old trail, faster but rough. You'll beat them there. Lena looked at him. Can you ride? I've ridden with worse. Martha handed Lena a wrapped bundle dried meat bullets matches. "You bring him home," she said softly. "You bring all of him home." Outside, the moon rose behind clouds, casting a silver sheen over the land. The tracks in the snow hadn't faded yet, and Lena knew this night would write itself into the ledger one way or another. With ink or with blood. If you can feel your heartbeat, then it means you still have a choice: run or fight. And I ain't ever been much for running. The wind bit crueler near Dustwater Ridge, whipping through Lena's coat, as if to reach her skin. The terrain was rugged, broken, with sharp stone outcroppings and steep declines that turned the narrow trail into a treacherous descent. She clung tightly to the saddle, teeth, gritted eyes fixed on the waning trail ahead. Ben rode beside her, pale but determined, his jaw set like a man with unfinished business. Wren followed, close, rifle strapped across her back, her silence as loud as thunder. They were racing against time. The shortcut Ben knew cut through a canyon so narrow that the horses had to go single file. Shadows poured over them from the ridgeline, and every echo bounced like gunfire off the stone. The silence held weight and unseen tension hanging just beyond what their ears could hear. Lena's mind spun with every hoofbeat. Thomas somewhere ahead, bound, maybe bleeding, or worse. "Don't speak unless you need to," Ben muttered behind her. "Sound travels easy here." Lena nodded and tightened her grip on the reins. They reached the ridge overlooking the abandoned quarry just as dusk melted into night. The moon was half shielded behind a veil of clouds, casting a pale gray light over the landscape. Below them, a single lantern glowed in a gutted structure that once held the foreman's office. Shadows moved inside. Lena counted 3, maybe 4. Ben squinted. "That's Carter's saddle." Lena pulled out her father's old binoculars and steadied them. Inside the office, Thomas sat bound to a chair. His face was swollen, one eye nearly closed. But he was alive. He was watching the doorway with the kind of stillness that only came from knowing time was short. 2 men stood guard, rifles across their chests. One leaned on a table, laughing at something the other said. Behind them, a man stood near the back wall, facing a map nailed to the boards. Lena recognized him instantly, even from behind. Clay Merrick. She felt heat rise in her throat. Her grip on the binoculars tightened. The man didn't look dangerous, gray suit, lean build, too clean for this place, but his presence coiled the air like a snake in waiting. "We go quiet," she whispered. "Wren flank the north edge. Ben and I will take the south entrance." Ben touched her arm. "You sure you're ready for this, no?" she said. "But I don't need to be ready. I need to be fast." They moved like shadows, guided more by instinct than plan. Wren disappeared into the tree line. Lena followed Ben through a collapsed fence and over a pile of timber that once formed the base of a pulley tower. When they reached the south wall of the building, Lena drew her revolver and nodded. Ben moved first, slamming the butt of his rifle against the boards to make a distraction. The door burst open, and one of the guards rushed out just as Wren took him down with a blow from behind. The other guard turned, startled, and fired. The bullet missed, but not by much. Lena dove into the room. Thomas looked up sharply. Lena, the man near the map. Merrick turned slowly, calm despite the chaos. His eyes met Lena's, cold, measured. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is unexpected." Lena raised her gun. "Step away." Merrick's hands lifted, but not in fear. "Do you really think this ends with you walking out alive? I don't care if it ends with me at all. Just him." She nodded toward Thomas. Carter scrambled to reach his rifle, but Ben was faster, sending a warning shot into the ground at his feet. Carter froze, hands trembling. Wren entered behind them, rifle steady. "Cut him loose," she ordered. Carter hesitated, but Merrick motioned with a nod. Let him go. Thomas slumped as the ropes fell away. Lena caught him before he hit the floor. You're a hard man to track, she whispered. He smiled, bloody and dazed. You're harder. Ben kept his rifle trained on Carter while Wren gathered the telegrams and maps off the table. These papers prove it, Wren said. Rail lines, contracts, deeds with forged signatures. Merrick's been buying up land under aliases. Callahan Ranch is just the last piece. Merrick chuckled, slow and deliberate. You don't understand the game, girl. I'm not the villain. I'm the future. And the future doesn't care about sentiment. Lena stared at him, heart pounding. Tell that to the dead. Merrick's smile faltered for just a second. Outside, the wind picked up. A gust rattled the walls, and in that moment of noise, Carter lunged for his rifle. But Lena was quicker. One shot rang out. Carter collapsed, clutching his shoulder and howling. Merrick stepped back, hands still raised. You'll be hunted for this. No, Thomas rasped, dragging himself upright. You'll be tried. Ben tied Carter's hands behind his back, while Wren stuffed the evidence into her satchel. Lena kept her eyes on Merrick. Walk. They marched him out of the building and into the dark toward the trail. Every step Lena took, her heart thudded harder, not just with fear, but with a clarity she hadn't known before. She wasn't just a starving widow anymore. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting, and she wasn't alone. As they mounted their horses, Thomas slumped behind Lena, arms weak but clinging to her waist. Ben led Carter tied to a pack horse. Merrick rode under Wren's cold watch, silent now. The night stretched before them like an omen, but Lena rode with her back straight. Whatever waited in Bitter Mesa, they were ready to face it. Together. Sometimes justice looks less like a courtroom and more like standing your ground while the whole town watches. Dust clung to Lena's boots as she stepped off the train platform in Bitter Mesa. The town was just beginning to stir under the sharp morning light, a hazy blue still lingering on the distant peaks. It was a place of weathered storefronts and wooden awnings that creaked in the wind. Men gathered at the saloon doors, pausing in their low conversation as she passed. Children gawked from behind barrels. Everyone had heard. The widow from Callahan Ranch had brought Clay Merrick in with her own hands. Wren walked just ahead of her rifle, still strapped tight, hat pulled low. Ben followed with Carter slumped in irons, and behind them rode a makeshift wagon carrying Thomas, bruised but alert, and the heavy ledger that proved the land fraud Merrick had orchestrated. Lena didn't flinch when the sheriff stepped onto the boardwalk and took in the sight. Sheriff Amos Gray was older than the hills, and just as immovable. He had eyes like cold steel and a voice that never needed to raise to be obeyed. I heard you were bringing trouble, he said. Lena raised her chin. I brought evidence. And him. She gestured to Merrick, whose boots were now caked in trail dust, suit-torn pride long since buried under the weight of his own arrogance. Gray looked from her to the prisoner. You didn't just find this out in the hills, Lena. No, sir, she said. We found it buried in our deeds, our history, and a whole lot of pain. The sheriff motioned for his deputies to take Merrick and Carter. He took the ledger from Wren and thumbed through it, eyes narrowing as he skimmed the pages. This enough to hold him, he asked. It's enough to bury him, Wren said. Forgery, bribery, coercion. Names of folks in this town, too. That made Gray pause. He gave her a look heavy with things unsaid. You realize this ain't gonna go easy. Some of these names got roots in Bitter Mesa. Lena's voice was steady, and some of us had nothing but roots until Merrick came through with a shovel. The sheriff's gaze lingered a moment longer, then he gave a nod. Town Hall. 1 hour, By the time they reached the courthouse, the gallery was full. News had traveled fast. Farmers, ranchers, and townsfolk crammed the rows, some curious, some furious. In the front sat Clara Grayson, Bitter Mesa's only lawyer, and the first woman Lena had met in months, who looked like she wore her spine like armor. She'd agreed to represent Thomas and Lena's family pro bono after seeing the papers Wren had gathered. Clay Merrick stood in chains, silent now, his silver tongue dulled by the reality of cold, hard proof. Carter, arms bound and face still tight with pain, muttered curses under his breath. Clara rose from the defense table, voice like a bell. Your Honor, what we present today is not merely a matter of law, but a matter of integrity. The documents we've submitted prove that Clay Merrick, under false names and through illegal means, attempted to consolidate land surrounding the Bitter Mesa expansion project. The last piece, Callahan Ranch, was targeted for takeover through coercion and bribery. The judge, a stout man named Fletcher Reeves, with a lifetime of wear carved into his brow, flipped slowly through the packet of evidence. Merrick, he said, voice slow and deliberate. What do you have to say for yourself? Merrick finally looked up. Business is ruthless, Your Honor. I made offers. I paid what the land was worth. If some refused, that's their pride, not my crime. Clara stepped forward. And when they refused, you forged signatures, hired men to intimidate, kidnapped a landowner's son, and tried to destroy the paper trail. Merrick scoffed. And yet here I stand, brought in not by a lawman, but by a widow and a group of vigilantes. Lena's stomach turned at his tone. She stood. All my life I've been told to sit quiet, told to be grateful for whatever scraps were handed down. But when a man tries to rip your children's future out from under you, when he sends armed men to your doorstep and leaves you to starve, well, that's when sitting quiet becomes the greater sin. The gallery murmured. Lena's voice grew firmer. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to feed my children. But now I want something more. I want every woman and man who ever thought they were too small to fight back to see what happens when we do. The judge held up a hand, silencing the room. You've made yourself clear, Mrs. Callahan. Thomas touched her wrist gently, and she sat again. Gray rose from his chair, face unreadable. Your Honor, I've reviewed the evidence. I believe there's enough to move to formal charges. But more than that, we need protection for the families affected. These land grabs weren't just criminal. They were surgical. And this town needs time to heal. Judge Reeves stared long at Merrick. Then he nodded once slowly. Clay Merrick, you are hereby remanded to state custody pending formal charges. Bail is denied. Carter Greeley will face trial for kidnapping, conspiracy, and unlawful possession of firearms. Merrick didn't flinch, but Lena saw it in his eyes, something cracking underneath. As the courtroom emptied, townsfolk stopped Lena to shake her hand. Some with tears. Others with quiet nods of respect. Outside, the sun had risen high above the hills, casting warm gold across the land. Children ran through the street, and for the first time in weeks, Lena felt her shoulders loosen. She stood beside Thomas, whose bruises were healing, but whose smile had returned. Wren leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, eyes squinting into the horizon. We did it, Lena whispered. No, Wren said. We just started. She pointed toward the south, where a line of wagons moved slowly along the road. Families, ranchers, farmers who had heard the news and were coming to reclaim what was theirs. Ben came around from the stable reins in hand, his hat low against the sun. Where to now? Lena looked down the street past the courthouse, past the storefronts, and empty lots that Merrick had once hoped to own. The people would rebuild, but not without help. We go home, she said. We've got land to work, fences to mend, and mouths to feed. Wren added, and a whole town to watch our backs. Lena smiled as her children ran toward her boots, kicking up dust. The youngest Annie leapt into her arms. I heard you shot a man, she squealed. Lena laughed heartful, only in the shoulder. As they turned back toward the wagon, a figure stood just down the road leaning on a cane, an older woman wrapped in a beaded shawl, face lined with years, but eyes sharp as ever. Elder Sani, matriarch of the Diné lands south of Bitter Mesa. You came, Lena said. The elder nodded. You protected what was sacred. Now we protect you. The wind carried her words over the rooftops as the people of Bitter Mesa gathered behind them, ready for the next chapter, not just of survival, but of rebuilding a future that belonged to them all. You think it's over, just because the fire's out, girl. There are embers beneath your floorboards still burning. Smoke curled like a question from the old chimney, the scent of burnt timber clinging to the rafters long after the last bucket of water had been thrown. Lena stood in the ruins of her kitchen, blackened wood and soot-crusted stone surrounding her like the bones of something sacred and broken. The fire hadn't taken the house, not entirely, just the back portion. Just enough to remind them that safety was still a fragile thread. Wren knelt near the charred doorway, fingers brushing over the edges of a scorched window frame. Accelerant. Kerosene, most likely. Ben stood watch near the tree line, his rifle slung loosely but his eyes sharp. No sign of who lit it. No tracks, no scent trail. They knew what they were doing. Thomas stood beside his mother, jaw tight. They waited until we were gone. Lena didn't need to ask who they were. Even with Merrick locked up and Carter awaiting trial, his money still moved like poison through the veins of Bitter Mesa. Some of the men whose names had appeared in Wren's ledger weren't behind bars. Not yet. Some still clung to their influence like dry grass to kindling. It's a message, Wren muttered, and not a subtle one. They picked the wrong family to scare, Thomas said, but there was a tremor under the steel of his voice. Elder Sani arrived that afternoon with baskets of dried meat, cornmeal, and cedar. Her eyes swept the damage lingering on the fire-blackened beams before turning to Lena. This is not just crime, she said quietly. This is sickness. Fear has no honor when it spreads like this. Lena didn't speak. Her hands were still streaked with ash, her heart still beating too hard in her chest. She felt the tight coil of worry for her children sleeping now in the barn, their beds spared only by chance. Sani touched her arm gently. You think it's over just because the fire's out, girl. There are embers beneath your floorboards still burning. Lena met her gaze. What do I do? Keep fighting. Sani's voice was calm but firm. You start protecting. That evening, Wren laid out maps across the kitchen table, what was left of it. She pointed at the valleys surrounding their ranch. They'll come again. Not as openly, maybe not for weeks, but they're hoping to push you to leave, to abandon this land. Ben nodded. They've seen what you stirred up. Now they want to douse it. Lena rubbed at her temple, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. I won't leave. We know, Wren said. That's why we stay ahead. The plan came together, slowly built on strategy and desperation. Sentries at night. Watch rotations with the neighbors who hadn't turned away. Elder Sani sent 2 young men from her village, Rafi and Cohen, quiet, watchful types, who moved like wind over rock and carried stories older than most could remember. They built fire breaks around the barn and house-dug trenches, stocked supplies and hidden caches along the trail. The children were taught drills, what to do if danger came, while their mother wasn't near. Lena hated that part most of all. Hated watching Rosie's little hands shake as she practiced hiding under floorboards. Hated the way Annie stopped asking when the house would be safe again. But through it all, the land held steady. The crops still pushed through soil. The hens still laid. Life, stubborn and small, continued. 3 nights later, Lena heard the crunch of boots outside just before dawn. She was already awake. Her heart had learned to never fully sleep. Ben was at the door before she reached for her coat. He opened it slowly, rifle in hand. A figure stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, one arm cradled against his side. Blood soaked the sleeve. His face was half shadowed by his hat, but Lena knew that frame. She'd seen it in the courthouse, in her nightmares. Carter. Ben raised the rifle. "No," Lena said sharply. "Let him speak." Carter's voice was hoarse. "They turned on me. The ones who stayed behind. Said I was weak. Said I let you live." Lena crossed her arms. "You did more than let me live. You tried to end this family." He nodded once, ashamed. "I thought I could outplay them. Use your boy to pressure you, help Merrick get what he wanted. But when he was taken in the rest, they didn't stop. They just got quieter, meaner." Wren appeared behind her, pistol on her hip. "Why come here?" she asked. "Because they'll kill me," he said. "And because you're the only ones who'll know what they're planning." Lena didn't trust him, not even close. But the wound was real, and the fear in his eyes wasn't faked. Wren gave him a tight look. "You're not sleeping here. You'll stay in the barn under watch. You lie, you bleed out on your own." He didn't argue. That night, Lena sat on the porch steps, a blanket around her shoulders. The stars were wide above the ranch, the sky endless and heavy. The mountains stood quiet, but she no longer saw peace in their shape, only the long shadows they cast. Thomas joined her, bringing warm tea. "You believe him?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I believe what he's running from." Thomas sipped quietly. "Then we're not done." Lena reached over and took his hand. "No, we're not done." In the distance, an owl hooted once. The wind rustled the tall grass. And Lena Callahan, mother of 9, widow of a man buried beneath the cottonwoods, sat upright as the earth whispered promises of the storm still to come. When a man's regret outweighs his pride, that's when he's dangerous. But it's also when he's useful. Carter was pale and feverish by morning. The blood on his shirt dried into a brown crust that tugged every time he moved. Wren sterilized the knife over the stove flame, while Ben ground his teeth nearby arms, crossed one eye on the barn door and the other on the rifle leaning within reach. "I still say we let him rot," Ben muttered. "You're not wrong," Wren replied calmly, "but we also need what he knows." Lena didn't speak. She stood at the barn window, watching Carter breathe like every exhale cost him. Guilt, fear, and pain swam through his face in equal measure. She didn't want redemption from him. She wanted protection for her children, and Carter held a map to the people who still threatened them. Wren cleaned the wound and stitched it shut in the hayloft, while Raffi and Cohen stood guard. When Carter came to again, his lips cracked and dry, he whispered, "You need to go to Clay Ridge. There's a meeting happening 4 days from now. They're calling it a harvest celebration, but it's a front. Merrick's nephew Ezra is stepping up." Ezra Klein, Ben's voice was sharp. "He's worse than Merrick ever was. They're going to sell off what Merrick had, land cattle weapons. Buy loyalty with gold. They want to expand, push out every small family ranch left from the reservation border to Mule's Spine." Lena felt a cold dread settle in her chest. "And you were part of that plan," Carter didn't answer. Later that night, Lena walked the perimeter of the property with Wren, moonlight striping the grass between their boots. "Do you believe him?" Lena asked. "I believe men don't bleed that much for fun," Wren said, scanning the trees. "And I believe this: when a man's regret outweighs his pride, that's when he's dangerous. But it's also when he's useful." Lena turned to her. So we use him, we do more than that, Wren said. We plan around him. They agreed to send Wren and Cohen to Clay Ridge. Raffi would stay behind to help guard the children. Ben would lead the defensive fortifications with Thomas. Lena, despite the fear still nestling in her chest, would keep her home grounded and calm. The following day, as clouds crawled across the sun, Lena gathered her children. She told them nothing of the plans, only that things might feel tense again, that they were safe because they had each other. Maya, the youngest, reached up and touched her mother's cheek. "Are you scared?" Mama Lena knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "Yes, but being scared doesn't mean we stop. It means we move careful." Rosie watched with a quiet sort of knowing in her eyes. She had grown faster than Lena had wished. That night, after the children were put to bed, Carter sat with Lena on the porch. He looked older, thinner, as if the lies had left his body in smoke and ash. "I saw what Merrick did to people," he said softly. "I thought I could control it, benefit from it. I wanted to climb my way out of the dirt. But I just sank deeper." Lena sipped from her mug. "And now I see something. I never had people who fight for something more than power. You built this with your hands. You feed your kids with your heart." She didn't answer. She didn't forgive. But she listened. The following evening, Wren returned. Her clothes were dust-covered, her eyes narrowed from long nights and sharper conversations. "They're preparing more than a sale," she told Lena privately. "Ezra's rounding up a new militia. Half are ex-deputies Merrick bought off. He's offering land to men who'll clear out the problem settlers, meaning anyone without a badge or a title deed passed through his family." "They'll come here," Lena said. "Not yet," Wren replied. "But soon." Lena paced the floor of what had been her kitchen, and now looked more like a command post. Maps, tools, bundles of preserved food lined every surface. "We can't wait. If we wait, we bleed." Wren nodded slowly. "I have an idea, but it means going back into that den and stealing something from Ezra's own tent." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Suicide. Not if we distract them first." The plan that unfolded was more daring than Lena was comfortable with, but necessary. They'd send Cohen and Thomas as traders with livestock faking interest in Ezra's auction. Meanwhile, Wren and Carter, who knew the layouts and the guards, would slip into the inner tent to retrieve the ledger that named all the men involved, all the buyers, the plan's timeline, and the funding trails. Lena hated it. Every piece. But it was the only way to expose the rot before it reached her doorstep again. "I'll go too," Lena said. "No," Wren and Ben said at once. "Yes," Lena snapped. "If Carter tries to double-cross you, I'm the one he fears most, and I know how to listen without being heard." In the end, they didn't argue. There wasn't time. They had 2 days. That night, sleep came fitful. Dreams full of fire and footsteps on dry grass. Lena woke to the wind howling across the plain, her children still sleeping soundly in the barn. She pulled her coat around her shoulders and walked out to the pasture. There, under the moon, the horses stirred restlessly. Raffi stood with his back to the wind, watching the tree line. "They're stirring again," he murmured. Lena nodded, silent. He looked at her. "What you're doing? It will light a fire under the mountain." "Then let it burn clean," she said. She returned to the house, heart thudding hard. Her family was small compared to the monster Merrick had left behind. But small didn't mean weak, and mothers did not forget the hands that tried to silence their children's laughter. Morning would come too fast, but when it did, she would be ready. You don't outgun a snake like Ezra Klein. You outsmart him, then make damn sure he can't slither back. Dust coated Lena's boots by mid-morning, the kind that settled in your throat and stayed there like regret. The canyon trail to Clay Ridge twisted between scorched rock and scrub, the sky stretched wide and unforgiving. Cohen led the wagon with Thomas beside him, their spines stiff with the weight of falsehood. In the covered back sat 2 barrels of salted meat and a few chickens that clucked nervously with every jostle. Their livestock trade cover was paper thin, but they hoped it would pass long enough to get eyes on Ezra's stronghold. Behind them, riding with quiet tension, Lena adjusted her shawl to shadow her face. Beside her, Carter rode slow, his face hollow but alert. He hadn't asked forgiveness since they'd left the ranch, and she hadn't offered it. They were bound for something far colder than absolution. Wren had gone ahead on foot the night before, slipping into Clay Ridge through the dry arroyo beneath the ridge wall. She'd be waiting with stolen guard patterns and a clear path into the tent where Ezra held court. The plan was dangerously elegant: cause a distraction during the auction, create just enough chaos for Wren, Lena, and Carter to slip in, find Ezra's ledger, and disappear before suspicion caught their scent. Lena's grip tightened on the reins. She wasn't just doing this for survival anymore. She was doing it to crack open the belly of a system that had chewed up too many lives, hers included. At noon, Clay Ridge came into view, a blot of tents, wagons, and banners nestled in a crook of the hills. The smell of roasting meat and unwashed bodies drifted toward them. It had the look of a celebration, but Lena saw through it. This was no fair, it was a war council in disguise. Cohen greeted the gate guards with casual ease, flashing trade slips and offering a bottle of corn whiskey. The guards, already drunk on power and liquor, waved them through. Inside, the chaos was barely contained. Dozens of men milled about near paddocks where horses were shown off like prizes. Others haggled over rifles laid out on canvas or crates stamped with ammunition logos from the old Army surplus routes. Ezra Klein was preparing not for peace, but for conquest. Lena dismounted, glancing toward the central pavilion, Ezra's tent. It loomed like a circus beast, red canvas flapping with each gust of wind. There, Carter murmured, pointing discreetly. That flap leads straight to the command table. Ledger's usually in a lockbox beneath it. She nodded once. Let's go. As Cohen and Thomas drifted toward the livestock corral, Thomas threw a burlap sack under a wagon axle. Inside it, a small jar of homemade fire accelerant Wren had concocted using lamp oil and pine tar. When lit, it would burn bright and fast, but only long enough to clear the crowd's attention from the tent. Wren's figure appeared from the edge of the ridge, a ghost in shadow, darting between tents, then pausing near the guard station. She gave the signal. Thomas bent down, struck the match, and tucked it under the sack. The explosion wasn't large, but it was loud, sharp, and sudden. Fire licked up the side of the wagon. Chickens scattered, men shouted, and all at once the crowd surged toward the flames. Lena and Carter moved fast, slipping into the red tent, hearts pounding. Inside, the air was hot and thick with the scent of leather, gun oil, and sweat. Maps lined the walls, pushpins marking every county along the reservation border. On a table lay an open ledger, columns scrawled in tight, mean handwriting. Names, prices, territories, signatures of men already bought. There, Carter whispered, reaching under the table. He pulled out the lockbox and jimmied the latch with a blade from his boot. Inside were more papers, deeds, supply contracts, a sealed envelope marked Corvus Mining Syndicate. That name alone tightened Lena's gut. "Grab it all," she whispered. Footsteps thundered outside. Someone barked orders. The fire was already being brought under control. Wren burst in through the side seam she'd sliced. "Time's up! Move!" They ducked out through the gap and into the rear path, but not fast enough. 2 guards rounded the corner. There, one shouted, raising a pistol. Lena fired first. The shot cracked the air the man dropped. Carter tackled the second as Wren dragged Lena into cover. In seconds, Carter was back up, face bloodied, but eyes sharp. Run. They sprinted across the backfield, hooves stomping behind them. Wren had prepped a second escape path, a dugout tunnel behind the dry creek bed that led to a collapsed fence on the west side. Lena dove in first, the cold earth scraping her arms, then Carter, then Wren. Gunfire echoed overhead, but no bullets followed them underground. When they emerged, they were nearly half a mile from Clay Ridge. Horses waited tied to brush. Wren untied them with trembling fingers. Lena's hands were covered in dirt and blood, the ledger tucked inside her vest. "We got it," Carter said, panting. "No," Lena corrected. "We got them." They rode hard, circling back under the shadow of the hills. By dusk, they reached the halfway cabin where Raffi waited with food and fresh water. Ben arrived by nightfall with a second wagon. Inside the lamplit cabin, they spread out the contents of the lockbox. Wren pointed to the syndicate envelope. "Corvus Mining, those bastards have tried to buy tribal land 3 times this year. And now they've found themselves a warlord to clear it for them." Ben growled. Lena stared down at the documents. So many names of men who had once sat at her table, shared whiskey with her late husband, kissed her children's foreheads. "We exposed them," she said quietly. "All of them." And how Carter asked. "You don't outgun a snake like Ezra Klein," Wren said grimly. "You outsmart him, then make damn sure he can't slither back." Lena looked up, fire rising in her chest. "Then let's build the trap. To bring him down, we had to let him believe he'd already won. There's no trap more dangerous than a mirror." The wind lashed the windows of the cabin, bringing with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of coming rain. Lena stood near the fire, the ledger clutched in her hands like a verdict. Around the table, the others sat silent. Cohen, Wren, Carter, Thomas, and Ben, each face lit by the flickering lamplight, each expression heavy with what they now knew. Ezra's reach was worse than they'd feared. The pages named men across 3 counties, sheriffs, ranchers, traders, judges, all feeding off the same corruption. But it wasn't just who he'd bought. It was what he planned. The syndicate had struck a deal with Ezra to clear tribal lands, flood the valley for a dam project, and open up strip mining where generations had lived. The war wasn't about cattle. It was about wiping out roots. Ben tapped the ledger. "We leak this to the right people, we start a fire they can't put out." "They'll bury it," Cohen said, voice bitter. "Or say we forged it." "No," Lena said. "We don't just leak it, we show them. In front of God and every buyer Ezra's counting on." Wren raised an eyebrow. "How we let him think he's won?" She laid it out slowly. Ezra had spent weeks preparing for his public show of power, a unity feast he called it to be held, in 2 days near the Broken Drum Ravine. All the landowners and tribal negotiators were invited. He would frame it as a treaty celebration with feasts and music and handshakes under lantern light, while signing contracts that would condemn the reservation from beneath the table. But Lena had a plan. They would attend the feast. Cohen would pose as a newly loyal cattleman, bringing word that Lena had been run out and her ranch torched. Carter, his right hand. Ben would arrive separately under the guise of seeking alliance to protect his lands from northern rustlers. Lena, hidden in plain sight, would appear once Ezra had signed his final paper, and then with the help of a few sympathetic figures and stolen proof, she'd rip the whole thing open. "We have to be precise," she said, pacing now. "One misstep, and we lose the chance to show them what he is. He has to believe we've given up." Thomas leaned forward. "What about escape?" Wren smiled grimly. "Already plotted. North Ridge Trail, 3 riders, spare horses, and cover at Larkspur Hollow. If we need a fast out, we'll have it. Cohen folded his arms. You're sure you want to walk into this? Lena's eyes burned. I don't want to. I have to. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Cohen and Carter shaved, traded their dusters for fine coats and boots. Ben acquired a polished wagon from an old friend. Lena burned a lock of her own hair and wore a widow's veil, her entire body trembling the first time she looked in the mirror. She no longer recognized the woman staring back. On the evening of the feast, the Broken Drum Ravine buzzed with festivity. Paper lanterns swung in the trees, and roast venison perfumed the air. Long tables stretched beneath awnings, packed with men in wide-brimmed hats and women in silk gloves. The syndicate's representatives, polished and cold-eyed, stood near Ezra's tent, watching everything like hawks. Cohen and Carter were waved in with nods. Ben arrived half an hour later, feigning hesitation and distrust. Ezra's men welcomed them with open arms, and Ezra himself rose from his place to greet them, his white teeth gleaming, his cane tapping rhythmically against the polished stone beneath his boots. Lina stayed behind the tent flap, listening. Every word mattered now. Ezra spoke to the crowd with oil-slick charm. Tonight marks a new beginning, one built not on blood, but on partnership. We bring together the old ways and the new cattle and commerce tradition and future. There were cheers, toasts, clinking glasses. Cohen raised his voice. And what of Lena Holt? Ezra's smile curled. Gone. Couldn't stand the tide turning, poor woman. Shame, really. But every storm clears the land for stronger roots. Laughter rippled. From her shadowed place, Lena breathed deep. Her fingers brushed the edge of the folded ledger in her shawl. Her legs moved before her doubts could speak. She stepped into the open. The lantern light struck her face as Ezra turned. Silence fell. Cohen muttered, Lord save us. Lena's voice rang out calm and sure. You're right, Ezra. Every storm clears the land, and this one's coming for you. Murmurs swept the crowd. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Lena Holt, I thought you had the good sense to die in the dark. I did, she said softly, but I came back for the truth. She threw the ledger onto the banquet table. Pages splayed open, names, numbers, maps, contracts. She didn't have to shout. The silence did it for her. This man, she said, turning to the crowd, has sold you, every one of you, to the syndicate, to outsiders, to anyone who will fill his pockets. While he smiled and offered peace, he was stealing your land, buying your votes, and promising your children's futures to the highest bidder. One of the tribal elders stood slowly. You have proof. Wren stepped forward from the trees carrying a packet of signed letters dated and sealed. Ben added, and I brought witnesses. Folks whose names are in that book and who didn't know they'd been sold. Ezra laughed, but it cracked at the edges. You think a parade of paper and wounded pride can stop progress? No, Lena said. But it can start justice. The crowd shifted. Some men stepped away from Ezra. Others stepped toward Lena, and then gunfire. One of Ezra's men raised his pistol toward Wren, but Carter moved faster. His shot dropped the man. Chaos exploded. Ben pulled Wren back. Cohen kicked over a table. Lena ducked as another bullet whizzed past. Move, Carter shouted. They ran not toward the ridge trail, but the southern edge where Wren's horses were tethered in the dark. Ezra shouted, Find them, burn their names from the dirt, but Lena had already disappeared into the trees. By the time Ezra's men realized the fire had been set at the back of his supply tent, another of Wren's tricks, it was too late. The blaze illuminated the ravine in orange fury. Lena rode hard, the ledger strapped to her back heart, pounding with clarity. She hadn't defeated Ezra yet, but she'd cracked his mask wide open in front of the very men who once followed him. As thunder rumbled on the horizon, and hooves pounded the earth beneath her, Lena knew this wasn't the end. It was the reckoning's beginning. Justice, when it finally comes, doesn't roar, it walks in quiet and ruins a liar's echo. Rain fell steadily over the high plains, washing the dust from the grasslands and soaking the folds of Lena's long coat as she rode alongside Cohen and Carter. The scent of wet earth and pine filled the air, a sharp contrast to the smoke that had billowed from Broken Drum Ravine just hours before. Behind them, the hills swallowed the glow of Ezra's burning camp, and with it any illusion he had left of invincibility. They reached Larkspur Hollow before dawn. The camp Wren had prepared was barely more than a ring of rocks and canvas, but it was quiet, hidden, and dry. Thomas had arrived ahead of them with Wren and the children tucked away in a nearby cave, where the smoke from their small fire would vanish into the mist above. Lena dismounted slowly, her body aching from the ride, and her mind heavier still. She hadn't slept in 2 days, but justice didn't rest, not yet. Ben arrived shortly after, breathless, his horse lathered with sweat. "They're turning on him," he said, dropping his soaked hat by the fire. "Half the cattlemen left in the night. I rode through South Fork Ridge, saw Ezra's own men arguing at the checkpoint." "You split his command." "He'll regroup," Cohen muttered. "He's too prideful not to." "He won't have time," Lena said. "We move now." Wren looked up from where she sat, tending a wounded shoulder. "Move where? To the courthouse." The men glanced at one another. "You're not serious," Carter said. "The judge in Dry Creek's been bought for years." "Not him," Lena said, "but the new magistrate in Tamerlane, Judge Ashby. She's got no ties to Ezra. And if we bring this ledger, the letters, the maps, we force her hand. Ezra'll have eyes all over that route. Then we take one he won't expect." They rode east through washed-out canyons and bitter wind. With each mile, Lena felt the grip of fear lessen, replaced by purpose. Every splash of mud on her boots was a step toward something she hadn't dared dream: freedom, not just for herself or her children, but for the entire land Ezra had tried to carve into profit. They reached Tamerlane on the second morning, cloaked in drizzle and the hush of early hours. Lena led the way into the stone courthouse, the ledger wrapped in oilskin pressed close to her chest. Judge Ashby was already seated when they entered, her silver-streaked hair, tied-back eyes sharp and unreadable behind wire spectacles. Lena didn't wait to be summoned. She stepped forward and set the evidence on the table before her. "This," she said clearly, "is the truth you've been denied. The land thefts, the tribal contracts forged under threat, the buyers and their cutbacks, it's all in here. Names, dates, signatures." The judge regarded her, then the bundle, then slowly reached forward and opened it. Silence reigned as she read the first few pages, then more, then deeper still. "Where did you get this?" she finally asked. "Ezra Gaines kept it," Lena said, like a man too sure of his grip. Ashby looked up at Ben. "In your role, I lost neighbors to his deceit. And I have men here who can testify to what they saw at Broken Drum." Ashby didn't blink. "Bring them." One by one they came: Cohen, Carter, Thomas, Wren, even a tribal elder named Saul, who'd risked everything to follow them. The testimonies rang with clarity, with fire, with bruised honor and reclaimed spine. Ashby listened, wrote notes, asked questions so precise they drew blood. Finally, she leaned back. "This court will convene at dusk for a full hearing. I'll summon a federal circuit judge. The scale of this, it demands oversight." Lena nodded. "We'll be here." But just as they stepped outside, the shot cracked from across the square. Cohen pulled Lena down instinctively. The bullet hit the post behind her, splintering it clean through. Carter fired back toward the rooftops and townsfolk screamed, scattering like crows from a tilled field. Sniper Ben shouted, "Get to cover!" Lena's heart thudded in her ears as she crawled behind the trough. A second shot rang, but it went wide. From the edge of the alley, Wren's rifle barked. A man screamed from the roof. They dragged Lena into a boarded-up stable. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. Rage now burned hotter than fright. "He's still trying to silence me." Cohen checked her over, blood smearing her sleeve. "Just grazed." "It's not over," Wren said. "Ezra's panicking. He knows if this trial goes public, he loses everything." Lena straightened. "Then we make sure it does." That evening, the courthouse bell rang hollow and loud over the town. Word had spread and people filled the benches. Some Ezra had cheated, some afraid, some hopeful. And Ezra himself walked in, flanked by two remaining men, eyes bloodshot and hollow, his once white hat spattered with rain. He sneered at Lena, but said nothing. Judge Ashby opened the session. One by one, the facts spilled out. The ledger, the contracts, the threats, the land swap deals made with forged tribal council seals. Ezra sat stone still as names he trusted were turned into evidence. Ben presented the sealed letters. Wren read the names of children displaced. Thomas spoke of the mine equipment already moved in weeks before approval. Then Lena stood. She read her own account, how she'd married for bread, how she'd taken her children out of hunger, how she'd believed the man who offered help was simply kind. "I was a widow, a starving one, and he saw not a woman, but an opportunity." Her voice didn't waver. "But I found something stronger than shame. I found truth, and I'm standing in it now." Judge Ashby looked at Ezra. "Do you wish to speak?" He rose slowly, hat in hand. His voice was quiet. "What she says, much of it is true. But I did it for progress, for the future." "You did it for power," Lena said. Ezra flinched and sat. Ashby tapped her gavel once. "The circuit judge arrives in 2 days. Until then, Ezra Gaines will be held in federal custody. The court is adjourned." Outside, Lena exhaled. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the sound of a lie cracking open. The crowd parted for her, not as a widow, but as a woman who stood and stayed standing. She walked down the courthouse steps into the light rain and lifted her face to the sky. The land doesn't forget who loved it, who fought for it, and who tried to steal it. Justice, like rain, soaks everything eventually. The day the circuit judge arrived, the sky was wide and clean, the kind of blue that stretched forever over the plains and made you feel both small and anchored. Lena stood in front of the courthouse, in her only clean dress, patched at the sleeves, but pressed straight. Her children were by her side, their hair combed and eyes solemn. Cohen stood just behind her, and Wren, arms crossed, watched the horizon as if daring trouble to return. Inside, the courthouse buzzed. Townsfolk who had once turned away from Lena in the market now nodded at her with quiet respect. Ezra's name had curdled in their mouths, and though no one said it outright, folks had started to wonder if they too had been blind. The circuit judge, a tall black woman with steel-gray eyes named Judge Mariah Bellamy, stepped into the chamber without preamble. She was known across the territories as unshakable, and Lena had read about her in a newspaper years ago, how she'd ruled against 3 rail barons in a single day and walked away untouched. Lena had held on to that name like a lifeline. Judge Ashby passed the case over with dignity and precision. Lena watched as the documentation was laid out piece by piece, more than enough to bury Ezra. But still he sat in his corner of the courtroom, lips, tight eyes flickering with contempt. Judge Bellamy opened with clarity. This hearing will determine the validity of the claims made against Ezra Gaines regarding land fraud threats and illegal seizure of tribal and private property. She looked directly at Lena. You are listed as the primary witness. Please begin. Lena rose, her knees stiff, but her voice clear. She recounted it all again this time, not for survival, not for vengeance, but for record. She spoke of her husband's death, the starvation that followed the offer. Ezra made, the contracts waved under her nose, the land slowly siphoned from the people she loved. He counted on us being too tired to fight, she said. But we weren't. We're still not. Judge Bellamy nodded once, then listened through every testimony. Cohen's was grim and sharp, Ben's steady and unwavering. Wren's voice cracked once when she spoke of the families pushed off their homesteads. But the room didn't shift until Elder Saul stood and opened a small leather pouch. From it, he drew a document, an original tribal deed, signed a century ago, proving that the ravine and surrounding land belonged to the Eastern Shoshone and had never been legally sold. Ezra had forged a new copy, changed the seal, and slipped it through a corrupt notary. But the truth, written in the language of Saul's father and grandfather, spoke louder. Gasps rustled through the crowd. Ezra stood suddenly. This is a lie. I was given permission. Those deals were signed in good faith. Judge Bellamy held up a hand. Permission by whom? Ezra faltered. The council. Saul stepped forward. There hasn't been a council seat open to outside men in 60 years. You bought shadows, not signatures. The silence that followed was damning. Judge Bellamy turned back to Ezra. This court finds overwhelming evidence of fraudulent acquisition of land use, of force, attempted bribery of officials, and reckless endangerment of citizens. Ezra Gaines, you will be held for federal prosecution. Ezra sneered. You can't hold what you can't reach. The words were a mistake. Before he could move, Carter and Ben stepped in front of the door. Wren cocked her rifle just once, slowly, deliberately. You don't own the room anymore, she said. Ezra sagged in his seat. The fight had bled out of him. No more men to hide behind. No more papers to forge. When the gavel fell, it echoed in Lena's chest like a heartbeat. Afterward, Lena stepped outside alone. The air smelled of wild mint and old timber. She walked down the dusty road away from the courthouse, past the smithy, past the shuttered bank, until she reached the crest that overlooked the valley. The fields were greening again. Shoots of spring pushing up, brave through the frost. The land, wounded though it was, had never stopped trying. Cohen found her there. He'll be sent east, he said. Probably to Leavenworth. Lena nodded. Good. Folks are talking about forming a land cooperative. Something fair. A council, mixed voices. You started that, you know. I just told the truth. That's more than most do. She turned to him, eyes rimmed in quiet. I'm tired, Cohen. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. He didn't speak for a long time. Then softly, you think justice ends the story, but it doesn't. It just lets you write your own from there. She glanced at him, a half smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. That another one of your wise rancher sayings, no. That one's yours. They stood in the wind, not needing to say more. When Lena returned to the camp later, she found Thomas helping her children braid willow hoops for play. Wren was sewing new boots. Ben was mending fence lines by the edge of the glade. It wasn't a grand life, but it was honest. It was theirs. She set her coat aside and rolled up her sleeves. The sun dipped low, throwing long golden shadows over the hills, and for the first time in years, the warmth felt like it belonged to her, too. The educational lesson learned from this story is that standing for what's right may demand everything you have, but it can give you back even more, Justice isn't always loud or immediate, but it walks steadily when carried by truth. In the end, the land remembers those who defended it with heart, not greed. For those who have lived long, it's a reminder that it's never too late to be the voice that turns silence into justice.